Hey up, I'm Joe Law, and this is Yellowbelly Presents, the visual podcast where we invite industry leaders to share the stories, strategies and secrets behind their creative success. Today we have the extraordinary Sheila Atim, an actor, singer, writer and all-round creative force. From her Olivier Award-winning performances in Girl from the North Country and Constellations to her powerful roles on screen in The Woman King and The Underground Railroad, Sheila has established herself as one of the most compelling talents in the industry. Beyond her stunning performances, she's a passionate advocate for diversity and meaningful storytelling in the arts. Do you do it consciously sometimes, bringing either people you know or people you don't know into your work and into your characters? Do you catalogue them mentally, or does it tend to be
just sit watching them my next role?
Because in a similar way, I know a lot of songwriters, for example, will hear something someone says on a bus and write down in a notebook or on their phone or something, and when they come round to write in their next album, they'll get the notes out and it's like a scrapbook of all the things they've heard, or like a little collage of life, exactly like you just described making characters sometimes. Is that the sort of thing that goes into your thought process when you create your characters?
Less consciously as an actor, but definitely as a writer.
Yeah.
I think because as a writer, because you're writing multiple characters and you're trying to externalize the dialogue that might be like in your head, how do these two characters speak to each other?
Yeah.
You end up finding voices of people that you know. For me, often they just kind of drop in as opposed to me going, oh, I want to make this like so-and-so. It's like, oh, this feels like that person. And before I know it, I can sort of hear their mannerism, particularly if it is somebody I know who is also an actor and maybe I envision them in the role.
Yeah.
Then that really helps actually to hear that voice, because you start to write that character with a different cadence, and that's really important so that it doesn't feel like you've written dialogue that just sounds like
you've written 8
for everyone. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You've got to write really different people. Like, I tend to find there's always a character in something I have written that is like very much from Essex.
Yeah. What's your process when it comes to writing?
I think it is different each time.
Yeah.
And at the moment I'm working on a few different projects which have all come from different places, are quite different in terms of tonality, and also what's required of me. They're also across different mediums. So I'm sort of experiencing this difference in real time, right? If it's something that I have sort of, it's come from the stories come from my brain, it tends to kind of come to me as like a log line.
Yeah.
So like, wouldn't it be cool if such and such did something in such and such place at such and such time?
Yeah.
And then I just sort of go from there. And and I might ruminate on that for a little bit. And usually what I find is that I almost have to, the log line comes to me, and then the job of my brain and the writing process is to figure out what it is I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Because often I don't really know. There is something in this idea, and it's like the idea has come to me almost packaged, and I have to like open the package. Yeah. It's kind of dropped in my brain, and now I have to be a vessel for this thing to try and figure out what it is.
Okay.
And then I tend to find that through just that excavation and writing that I go, oh, I think this is what I'm trying to talk about, and it's almost like I'm having to kind of pull it out of myself.
Wow. Alongside
some of these characters, and usually there'll be like a central character or a central few characters that are connected to the logline, so they're therefore already they're strong in my mind's eye and ear in terms of how they look and sound and feel. But what they're doing and what their purpose is and what their journey is to be discovered.
Yeah.
And then if I'm coming on board with something, that's slightly different, because obviously the story, or at least the premise, is already there. And if I'm co-writing, on one of the things I am co-writing, it's about us working together to understand who this character is. And maybe if I'm coming on board somebody else's story, it's about trying to understand from them who they want this character to be and whether that's going to stay the same or whether that evolves. and we take that character in another direction. And then if it's something where I'm writing on my own, but I've been brought on board, you know, I'm working on a project right now, which I can't say too much about it, but it's quite unorthodox in its structure and format. So the research has actually been the most important thing.
Yeah.
And from the research has emerged story and characters. And I had this moment where like I'd sort of done all of these interviews and all this research, and I was kind of sat there with the blank page, and I was like, so what happens in this film? I was like, yeah, I was like, oh, I've got no more interviews to do. I've just got to like figure out what happens. And I just started to type.
Yeah.
That was it. And it's you know, for anyone who's listening, who's writing and is sort of scared of their own writing, you kind of can't be. You just have to be bad at first. And even the good writers are bad in their first draft or their first iteration, but you just have to keep on kind of raking back over it. And, you know, I reread something yesterday because I'm sort of preparing it to package it and send it to producers, and I hadn't looked at it for a while, and I reread it and I was like, oh God, this needs a redraft. But you know, yes, that's fine. And then there were other bits where I was like, oh, actually, this is held up. This is like, I still like this kind of a couple of months later.
And just because it's bad at first doesn't mean you're a rubbish writer.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that is the point at which a lot of us are just like, I've done it before, just like, oh God, I'm rubbish at this. There's just no point trying.
Yeah.
No, it's literally like your first go. Keep going, and it might be rubbish for a while, but like it's going to get good. It will.
Yeah. And in both senses, in that your craft gets better with each project you do, but also each project gets better with each draft that you do. So there's kind of two concurrent lines of improvement happening. And I think particularly if you are, say, an actor or a director or somebody who's worked in a different, you know, who's worn a different hat within a project, it's very easy for us to forget that like scripts are changing on the day. If it's screen, you know, even if it is theatre, even if it's a well-established piece, if it's an adaptation of a classic, people will be making script changes up until press night or until we've got the take, right? And even then in ADR, you go in afterwards and you have to record a whole load of lines that you never said because you realise they stitched all together and it doesn't make sense. So I think I had to remind myself of that as a writer. I was like, oh yeah, I go on set and sometimes the script has changed that morning.
It's not set in stone.
It's not set in stone, and that's okay, you know, and it doesn't mean you're a bad writer. It just means that, you know, the process of externalizing what's in your mind isn't always straightforward. Often it's not. Yeah. And that in and of itself is a skill. So, you know, understanding how best you can do that for yourself is really important, but having patience with yourself and having some self-compassion is also really important.
I loved the bit of advice you just gave for writers there. Just listen to whatever piece you're writing at the moment, and each of those pieces might tell you something different. And that's okay. You don't have to come at each project with the same thing that you came at the last one with. You can go, okay, I don't know what this is meant to be yet, but this conversation that's popped into my head is really interesting. And like you said, you figure out what it's meant to be later. But sometimes you might sit down and go, oh, there's something on my chest I really want to say. What's the story that can articulate that voice the most? And both of those are fine. You don't have to necessarily have like a cookie cutter, this is the way I write sort of
completely
process.
I also feel like we're in a tough time at the moment where there's not a lot of space for weird stuff. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Like the kind of like weird. David Lynchian, like decades later, people are still like, what was all that about? You know, there's not a lot of space for that. I mean, there is in the sense that you can always make it, you know. It just might not necessarily be the thing that's on people's mind when it comes to the box office, or you might not be given as big a budget to make it at the moment, which I think is a shame. I think the tide will turn because it always does. These things are always cyclical. Yeah. And so they boomerang back. But yeah, I do kind of, I've just got loads of weird ideas that start off as a thread and then who knows, and now I want to put this in it, and that might feel incongruous, but whatever. I feel like there was a real time, you know, the 90s indie cinema was a real time for that, where people could create these stories that didn't necessarily have all the answers tied up in a bow. Or these characters, or these worlds even, and that was just okay. And so I do.
Do you have a few examples of films like that from the 90s that have inspired you? The name that jumps into my head is Gilliam.
Yes.
Like
yes.
Fisher King or Brazil or...
Even just things like a Donnie Darko, where you're watching it and you're like, yeah, but you get on board with it.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? You just get you're in it, you're with it, and you come back and you watch it again, almost for that reason, to be like, what was all that about? You know?
Yeah.
Even stuff where like narratively it does make more sense, but it's just kind of, like an Edward Scissorhands, like this is weird. This bloke who's got scissors for hands living in this like idyllic town. But yeah, everyone, everyone gets on board with it in that we understand that that's the rules of this world. And we're being invited to step into that world. And I feel like the invitation part of it, I don't know, something's happened where it just doesn't feel as trusting as it used to. Like that's another thing that I love about the live experience and live theatre and live performance is that like I'm leaving my house, I've paid for my ticket, and I'm coming to spend this time with you in the same room, with you and a load of other people that I don't know, right? For 2.5 hours. And there's an unspoken contract in that.
Yeah.
We're coming to exchange something in this confined space. Like somebody,
we're here to be with each other.
Yeah, someone said theatre is community. I feel like it's probably a really famous phrase. I've just been like, somebody said theatre is community. some practitioner, like some Stanislavski. Like, it's gonna be something like that. My brain is terrible for remembering those things, but mate. It really is that where you're coming together, and so you trust each other, and you say, I entrust you with my emotions, really, like my entertainment, my attention. I'm giving you license to take me on a journey, and I'm just going to let you drive for the next however long. Whereas now I feel like there's a lot more need to control what the journey is. And that's not me like blaming the audience, actually, because I don't think it's the watchers.
It's what's
fault.
on offer, right?
Yeah. I think there's lots of, we could get political. I think there's lots of reasons why that's happening. But I wish there was a little bit more kind of close your eyes and step off the edge of the cliff and see, both from the side of the creatives, and the creators and the people who are consuming it.
Because there's absolutely an appetite for it. It's not like it doesn't work and people don't love it. Like Punch Drunk, as an example, is just the first thing that popped into my head. You never really know what you're going to see when you go and see it. They've got this massive, beautiful, big building down in Woolwich now. You go on, you put on your mask, and you see, obviously not in there when everyone's got the mask on, but in the bar before, all walks of life, all kinds of people, all kinds of ages, all kinds of classes who've come together to see something a bit weird, a bit unorthodox. And exactly like you said, they have put their trust in those performers, in that theatre company, Punch Drunk, to go, I don't really know what this is going to be, but I think it's probably going to be brilliant. And it is. And they're making a real success of it.
I sort of wonder if it's a bit of a sign of the times in that, we live in a lot of uncertainty, or and a lot of people more so than others around the world, and so people are just wanting surety from the things they consume, because of course to open yourself up to the magic of something like a Punch Drunk show where you don't know what you're going to get, means to also accept that you have surrendered and relinquished control in that moment. Obviously, again, within that unspoken contract there is a safety. We'll have health and safety. There's fire exits. There's no one's going to do nothing crazy. But I think it's in this time it's a little bit harder for people to trust in that, and I kind of get why. That's why it was like
especially when no one's got any money at the moment. Right?
Yeah, exactly. We're also broke, so that doesn't help.
If economically things are a bit easier, then it's easier to take a risk on, spending £40 for a ticket to theatre, £50, whatever. You're like, if it's not very good,
then it's all
I'm
right.
still alive. But if it's your one night out at the theatre with your family or whatever, or you booked a babysitter and you're not going to get another trip to the theatre for 6 months or whatever, then it becomes a bigger deal, right? So I think you're right. There's absolutely an economic element to these things as well.
Yeah, and I think also just a sense that, like, I open my Apple News app. Can I say
Don't
Apple?
do that.
Right.
What are you doing that?
And
Don't open the news.
You know what I mean? And you're like,
Oh, mate.
and you just close it immediately. Because like, I didn't wake up expecting that today. And here we are, bang, something's, happened that I feel like I maybe do or don't have any control over. So I can see why when it comes to, it's almost like things are reversed, like the worlds where we should be allowing ourselves to relinquish control.
Yeah.
We're kind of grabbing onto this idea of I need to know exactly what I'm watching before I watch it, or reading before I read it, or consuming before I consume it, because the rest of my life where I feel like I should have control because I voted for something, or I want to have a voice in society, I feel like I have less of one now, maybe. But then my hope is that as the boomerang effect comes into play, it gets to such a tipping point that people go, okay, well now when it comes to art, I want that uncertainty back, because gripping onto certainty isn't actually going to change the socio-political position. Actually, what can change the socio-political discourse is me digging into that uncertainty and that experimentation and that truth of like expression. I think we kind of grip on to what we think is important until we realize it's not helping, and then we go, we have to release that as well, to release it all, to actually make the wheel turn. That's my hope.
Mm-hmm. I think you're absolutely bang on. I think whatever is happening in life, economically, socio-politically, we tend to reach for the opposite of that in our art. So when society feels kind, we tend to reach for mean comedy.
Yeah.
When society's mean, we tend to reach for kindness. When society's chaotic, we look for things that are ordered. And when society feels like it makes sense and it's ordered, we look for things that are more chaotic and fantastical in nature. Yeah. And I think that tells us something interesting about what art is and what it does, and why we reach for it and when we reach for it.
I mean, there is, and I do remember the practitioner that said this, and now that I've said that, I'm like, is it wrong? Grotowski said that theatre is a place for provocation, I think. Listen, if I'm wrong, I'm sorry, lads. All right. I'm so sorry, Grotowski, and all the drama students out there that might be like, I just studied him and he didn't say that. But somebody, and I believe it was Grotowski, said that theatre is a place for provocation. And I think that's what I'm hoping that we will pendulum swing into, is that at the moment people don't want to be provoked because they're opening their Apple News app every day and they're 100%. Feeling provoked, like as you're having your breakfast. Do you know what I mean? You don't want it then. Everyone wants to have the choice to be provoked, either in the comfort of their own home at 9 p.m. when they turn on whatever streaming platform they turn on, or when they go to the theatre. But I think what's going to have to happen eventually is we're going to have to realise that if we're playing it safe in these worlds just to try and counterbalance whatever we feel is chaotic outside, we're going to stay trapped in a dynamic that doesn't make us feel much calmer and makes us feel more powerless, if anything. And actually, I think, as you said, like it really speaks to the power that art has, I think, to change minds, to galvanize people. And I'm not even just saying that in this like righteous kind of idealistic way, because I think it can get a little bit of a what's the word? It can become a bit of a sound, but it can become a bit of a sound bite where it's like, I believe things can change the world. But like I do genuinely, think about how many ideas have been sparked from something you saw, even an advert, that you might have seen as you were going past on the bus, like a billboard or whatever. I think we underestimate the impacts that these things are having on our psyches every day. And I 100%. Think people need to be encouraged to dream and think big at the moment, and just be ambitious and be angry as well, like be annoyed about stuff if you are, and externalize it and be galvanized to move, as opposed to kind of sink into ourselves and crave something that's gonna numb us from it.
100%. Art can, I know what you mean, it can sometimes sound a bit like self-involved, a bit.
It sounds like something a guest would say on a podcast. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Hello.
But it's true.
I think that all humans have had the same needs, and the outward expression of those needs have changed throughout time, but the underlying desire and feeling and need has remained the same. Absolutely. So what might have been So that need of community and togetherness, and that there is something bigger than me, might have been a Sunday church service 200 years ago, but it might be a football game today, or it might even be something I don't really understand, like a game of Call of Duty with 200 people on it, and that I know kind of through my headset.
Yeah.
Externally, they look quite different things.
Absolutely.
But internally, it's exactly the same.
Absolutely. And also to tie in a little bit of, I did science before I was an actor, and I don't remember lots of it. So, I'm not an expert. But one thing I do know is that the process of adaptation, i.e. a species adapting to its environment, is faster than evolution, right? And sometimes we conflate the two. So evolution is something that happens on like a real intrinsic, like a DNA level.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like you now have a third arm, human beings have third arms now. We have evolved to have that versus adapting, which is where, the depth of your eyesight changes because you use your phone more. So now generations are more nearsighted than they are able to focus on things in the distance, right? That's an adaptive thing that can kind of, over the course of a couple of generations, we can calibrate that forward and backward.
Is that genotypical as opposed to phenotypical? Is that different?
No, it's kind of both. I mean, phenotypical is just the expression of the genotype. Okay. So phenotypical is just kind of the thing that you see, right? I hope no scientist. I've got like potential theatre practitioners and scientists possibly coming after me.
The boys behind the camera coming after me and they're like, what is he on about? Get to the questions we've written.
It's all related. It's all related.
It is.
Right. But I say all that to say what you're saying is absolutely right. Like, yes, the way we express things changes, and that can be great, right? Because that brings forth new trends in expression and 100%. Artistry and culture. But fundamentally, evolution is slow. So we are the same as we were quite a long time ago. Yeah. And I think if we forget that and we raise up the idea of adaptation too high, we think we can also kind of conquer ourselves. But we're only human, right? And self-exposure is important. We must allow ourselves to be vulnerable. See what I'm doing? So that's something that I wish
come back
people
every
would,
week.
That's something I really wish that people would understand and allow a lot more. Like I'm a trustee at the Old Vic, right? Old Vic Theatre in London, on the Cut, and I went to see their production of Oedipus for the second time. I loved it, and I'm not just saying that because I'm a trustee at the Old Vic. I absolutely loved it. I rarely see things twice. And I took people I know the second time round, and that's a Greek, that's a Sophocles. It's an old play. But it still works now with new ideas, with the Hofesh Dance Company, who are absolutely incredible. Like, I just blew my socks off. Wonderful acting cast. Production value was incredible. Directing by Matthew Walters. But it was great, right? And it was just a real example of people really having a go at trying to say something new with this couple of 1,000 years old text. And it's important to do that. And I heard new things that I hadn't really heard or focused on in previous productions of Oedipus, which is great. That's the whole point. We can reinvent it, right? That's the adaptation. It's a new adaptation, but it's the same play dealing with the same human emotions and thoughts and ideas that we've been dealing with for thousands of years. If we can have humility as human beings and be only human, right, and allow ourselves to dig into that self-exposure and actually look at ourselves, see ourselves, I think a lot of it will be a lot more fun. Do you know what I mean? Which is the bottom line, is I'm just trying to have a bit of fun, I'm trying to see what this thing is all about and experience things and feel things. And some of those feelings will be uncomfortable, but it's not necessarily a bad thing to go through them. Sometimes it's good to experience uncomfortable things so that that when you're being put in an uncomfortable situation, that you want to take yourself out of it or take other people out of it if you can see other people being put through the same thing. We need to understand what the full spectrum of human emotion feels like so that we can kind of get to grips with who we are, what we're doing here, and try and have I don't want to say better because that doesn't feel like the right word, but a better time doing it. A part
of what you're touching on there is, I'm a new anyone who knows me will tell you I'm like the biggest optimist in the whole world. So when everyone feels like the world is like falling apart, I'm like, I think we've got it, guys. I think we're all good.
We'll be all right.
Not in like I like think not in like a naive or like Pollyanna-ish sort of way, but like if you're looking, I always think life, far as I can see, is the human existence is a little bit like a stock chart.
Mm-hmm.
If you zoom in far enough, you might see it go down, and that looks scary. But if you zoom out enough, it looks to me a lot like it trends mainly upward.
Yep.
And
which is true, it does.
Yeah. Obama said something like the long arc of human history trends upwards, and it does. So even when things feel like it's falling apart, the only way is up. Baby. Now, you're saying about looking inside uncomfortable stuff. I feel like it's much one benefit of living now is that it's way easier to do that stuff. We can talk here and I can say, I'm a sober alcoholic. I've suffered with depression. And like, if I'd have said that 50 years ago, people just wouldn't talk to me.
Mm-hmm.
Or like, if you needed antidepressants from the doctor, you would keep that locked down, because if anyone found out, you'd get like sacked from your job. Who's that nutter or whatever that. So there's one aspect, that's not to minimize people's struggle, but I think that's one aspect of life now that it is easier. And I think the byproduct of that is happier lives, saved lives, happier families, a happier world.
Mm-hmm.
So in that sense, I think it's a much better place to live in that particular respect at the moment.
I agree. And I think this thing is also a double-edged sword, because you're right. You know, human history as it goes forward is kind of trending upwards, generally speaking, right? It's better to be alive now, one could argue, than some other time. And I think we need to remember that some of this freedom of expression that we have built upon and afforded ourselves, like, you know, the example that you just gave, shouldn't just stop at a surface level of, I can say this and now it's fine. We can continue digging. And I think, you know, when we're considering art, the point to me, when understanding vulnerability through expression, is not just saying the thing and thinking it's easy to say and that's great and we can all just move on. But, you know, how do we find new ways to say what we want to say? How do we continue to dig underneath the thing that we think? You know, how can we allow ourselves to be taken by surprise, taken off guard, to be affected? You know, and I think that is one thing that if we as a society, as a species, become too knowing and we sort of get ahead of ourselves and we go, I figured it all out. I know me, you know, I can therapize myself within an inch of my own life. I know everything, right? Then we kind of watch these, you know, films, TV shows, stage shows, we listen to music, and we can end up reducing their value because we think, well, we know it all. We know how human beings work now. And of course we don't. And actually the beauty of what you've said is that, yes, things do generally trend upwards, but at the same time, because we are pretty much the same as we were before, we're still dealing with the same complexities in terms of how we operate as we ever have. We might just be more aware of them. But sometimes knowing something and experiencing something different, you know, the two things can be true. So I can have a much more acute understanding of my sense of self in this moment than maybe I would have had in the 1800s. But how I'm feeling in both moments might be exactly the same. You know, I might still be grappling with the internal struggles of what it means to be alive and to be like existentially sitting there like, so what's the meaning of life? You know, I can still be doing that. And maybe now it's just there's a load more textbooks and websites that might be grappling with the idea. But I think we need to keep grappling with it rather than feeling like we've reached this point where we just go, there's an app for that. Do you know what I mean? It's like, okay, and even if there is, like, does that app speak to your truth? Which is why it's so important, I think, to keep on trying to make stuff, trying to push boundaries, trying to challenge yourself, trying to surprise yourself and surprise others in what you can excavate.
There's a big difference, sorry to...
No, go.
It's exciting conversation. There's a big difference between knowledge and action.
Yes.
Knowledge should inform the actions you're going to take.
Absolutely.
But knowledge without action is nothing.
Right.
It's like I might have memorized every single page of all the Delia Smith cookbooks, but if I've never baked a cake, I can't bake you a cake.
There we go.
We're all going to go hungry.
There we go.
Unless you're putting it into action, like you say, like if you're a creative, making work, being consistent, using what you've learned to put something out there or do some good or express yourself, then it just stays between your ears, and that's not nothing, but it's not as full of potential and goodness as maybe it could be if you use it and
Absolutely.
get out there.
And do you know what? There's nothing like muscle memory. There's nothing like the experience of, like the embodied experience of something.
Yeah.
You know, we experience things in so many different ways, right? You know, whether it's just psychologically in our minds or it's emotionally, but like, you know, there's also, you know, particularly if you're a stage performer, there's a physicality to what you do. That is built into you. Funny enough, I was just sending a voice note to a friend of mine earlier. I was trying to give her advice about something completely unrelated. And I found myself going on some long kind of diatribe, which I'm probably doing now for this whole podcast, about like stagecraft. And I was saying, like, you know, the difference between angling your body here or like shooting a look up to right up into the gods every now and then, just to include the whole audience as opposed to only speaking here or only speaking here, and how you then shut out everyone else in the proscenium arch without realizing it. These little moments where you're like, you can only come to understand that if you've embodied it and if you've done it. You can sit and be like, yeah, I know how to act. I know how to connect with a character, but
I understand the text. I've read it a million times.
I get it, you know, I'm super intellectual about it, but but have you just stood on stage and done it? Or
have you had it, the shirt?
And have you had it go wrong as well? Which is, I think, it's a fundamental part of the only human experience, right? You have to stumble when you're learning to walk. You have to make mistakes. You have to know what it's like to get yourself out of that mistake. You have to read your bad drafts a couple of years later and be like, what's all that about? Maybe I should have another look at that. But that's okay, you know? But you can only do that through the process of trying. I mean, I was speaking to I've spoken to a few people actually, and I still consider myself quite early on in my writing career, but a lot of people who have ideas, but they're just very scared to make mistakes. They're very scared. They're like, I just don't know if I can write it because, you know, what if it's wrong? Or I don't want to go through the redrafting process. Or and this is a few people that I've spoken to. And I think I'm quite fortunate in that I've had quite a few moments in my life where I've kind of had to pivot or like change direction, or something hasn't worked out, and so I've had to try again. So I think generally I'm maybe a little bit more battle hardened in some ways, in that like I'm cool to take a big punt, and if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out, and I sort of lick my wounds and get on with it and do something else. But I understand for a lot of people, particularly creatives, it can be really difficult because there's a lot of self-exposure involved. These books are, did you guys like plant these books? They're like perfect.
How do you then put your whole heart into something and also accept it's not your literal heart? If it goes wrong or someone doesn't like it, it's not that they don't like you or you have less worth as a person. The balance between putting your all into your work and not taking it personal when it goes wrong, because it will sometimes, because we're human, that's a tricky balance to strike, isn't it?
I think where I've kind of landed with it at the moment, particularly as a writer, because now I'm experiencing a whole new version of what it means to have to perfect your work and something not being perfect the first time round. And I think particularly when you're an actor, you can get a lot of people, oh, it's so amazing. You can get a lot of the adulation, right? And you tend to be kind of the first, you take on that first wave. You come out stage door, there's people wanting you to sign your things, and you know, you get fan mail, and but you know, you're the face of it.
They don't go up to the writer or the director or the sound or the lighting guys.
You know, like all those guys. So it's a kind of different version, and I think the feedback can be quite immediate as well, particularly if it's live. You know really if an audience isn't feeling it. You know when a laugh happens, it happens, right? So I'm experiencing it in a different way as a writer, partly because there's a slightly delayed gratification aspect, but also because I'm building the whole world and all of these characters. And because I'm an actor who writes, so I sort of like talk the lines out in my head, I almost have to act everybody as opposed to just focusing on my one character. So there's like, you're taking on the criticism for all of that, you know, the world building, the dramaturgy, the characters, what are you trying to say, the messages in there, the themes, the, you know, all the ideas kind of, the buck stops with you, at least at the point at which you're developing it. And then of course other people come in and add their vision, right? So I guess the thing that I'm really learning is I think it really helps to be okay with the fact that sometimes getting notes is uncomfortable. I think for me, that's been the key, as opposed to trying to pretend that it's fine. I just know when I'm about to get some notes, or when I've received some notes in my email or whatever, I sort of brace myself and I go, there might be some things that when you read this or hear this for the first time, you're going to feel defensive. Or you're going to be like, well, I don't agree because you didn't know, but you haven't read, you didn't understand that this character is meant to be, you know. And I think that's more useful than trying to train yourself to not care or not feel it or be fine with it. Because again, that's not necessarily the truth of how emotion works. Sometimes it just is. And sometimes it's better to feel it, not act on it, but feel it and observe it, sit with it, maybe go away from the notes a bit, come back in the same way that you have to go away from your own draft and come back and see how it could be improved. You can also go away from notes, come back and go, okay, maybe I kind of see what they're saying a little bit. Sometimes it's more to do with how that particular person gives notes. So some people like to give lots of suggestions in their notes, which I personally don't find as helpful. I prefer to understand what the question is or the problem is underneath the suggestion, because I might have a different solution, right? And it still solves the problem, but I just get to solve it in my way, right? So it's also about remembering that that person is just trying to communicate something to you, and it's a collaboration to figure out between you what you think is to the highest good of the project. And I think that's the other thing is I try and separate myself from the project. And I'm just like, what's going to make this better? And I think because I came into the writing with like a little bit of an imposter syndrome, I was like, whatever you tell me, like, I'll make it good. That doesn't mean I bent over backwards to make every note make sense. Because some notes, I did actually go, I'm going to push back on this. And I have a very clear reason for why. And I think when you have your clarity for the notes that you're pushing back on, it makes it easier to then accept some of the notes that you think you need to sit with for a while. Being critiqued is hard though. It is hard. I think it's hard because, you know, like I said, there's a duality when you open yourself up. You open yourself up to praise or, you know, even if we're not talking on terms of people's feedback, like you just open yourself up when you are trying to express because you're trying to communicate with somebody. And, you know, for the most part, people aren't really communicating something and then shutting the door and not wanting to hear what's said on the other side. Like, that's not communication, right? That's just talking at someone or expressing at someone. So you do have to be open to the fact that there's going to be a dialogue there. You know, it's two of you, it's two sides or maybe multiple sides. But I think just, again, like having a little bit of self-compassion for yourself while simultaneously holding yourself to professional standard and saying, this is, you know, if you've chosen for it to be your career or your vocation, this is work. So I have to find a way to be okay with the fact that people are going to say stuff about what I've done. And that doesn't always mean it's a commentary on me as a person or my value or my worth. They also might say stuff that doesn't make sense to you and you don't have to go along with it, you know. It's a balancing act. But I think, for me, the thing of sitting with a note, giving it some time, going away and coming back really helps.
Could you talk to us a bit about how you approach your characters? Is it in the same way? Does the character kind of tell you what they need? How do you...
How do I do it?
Again,
it's different, man. I always laugh when I get these kinds of questions because sometimes I watch, you know, these kinds of interviews and people are like just so eloquent and I'm like, I don't know, you know. I'm just sort of having a go. I feel like I feel like
we're not putting a man on the moon.
Do you know what I mean? Like, but also I think part of I do think if I'm able to toot my own horn for a second, one of the things that I think I'm quite good at is having dexterity
Yeah.
when it comes to things like process and approach. I found that very useful because you will be working with different people. We're in a gig economy, right? Unless you've got yourself to a place as an actor or writer or director or whatever, where you only work with the same people every time. And there's a very small handful of creatives who do that.
Yeah.
And it doesn't tend to be a more modern way of working. But, you know, otherwise you will be working with different people on different sets, in different locations, different stories, different characters. Each thing requires its own thing. Sometimes the medium is different, or the style, the genre is different. I think that's the thing I enjoy personally. I really embrace this kind of ever-changing landscape. And I think that's probably why I ended up becoming an artist by vocation as opposed to anything else, because it's the thing that immediately switches my brain into like this problem solving mode. And I mean, funnily enough, would have been a doctor, and there is an element of problem solving mode in there, just in a slightly different way. But I love puzzles. I love actual physical puzzles as well.
Yeah.
I love puzzles. I love riddles. I love like, oh, we've got to figure it out. Anything that's sort of intricate or requires like, you know, requires some discovery. But there's something about discovery through performance and now through writing that really, for whatever reason, just sits in a different place in my body in a way that like other things don't. So that for me means that when it comes to process, I really do try and I have my own identity as Sheila, and I think that's kind of the only thing I really need to bring into the room with me.
Yeah.
You know, I also didn't go to drama school and do like a 3-year accredited course in the way that a lot of people have, and that's great, and it works for some people and it doesn't work for other people. A lot of people, you know, I mentor a few people who are in drama school at the moment, and I'm trying to explain to them that your drama school experience, you know, throw yourself into it, but once you leave, they essentially leave you with a toolkit, and you can choose whether you want to use the spanner or the screwdriver or the drill or the hammer or whatever, and you choose that based on who you are as a person, how your brain works, how your body works, how your mind works, but also what's required of you on that job. You might not need a hammer for this one because it's a screw. Why are you hammering in a screw to the nail, to the wall? Do you know what I mean? It's like it's understanding the nuance and being able to bend and shift with that nuance depending on whatever project it is you're working on. So sometimes something requires a bit more research.
Yeah.
Sometimes you don't need research because it's kind of there on the page. Sometimes there's not a lot on the page and you're now having to pull out more stuff. And there are clues in terms of how your character interacts with other people. You know, read the stage directions or the screen directions. That can tell you a lot about somebody, but can also, you know, leave you with the choice to go with that or work against that. Particularly if you're working on a classic piece, right? Like, you know, I played Emilia in Othello. Okay, great. There's loads of ways to play that role. How am I going to play it? What are the clues that are in the script? What have other people done before? Do I even want to focus on what other people have done before? What is my Iago doing this time in comparison to how other people play Iago or Othello or Desdemona? Or, you know, it's a tapestry that you're trying to put together. And I think people should take agency over how they want to do that, but also surrender themselves to what it's clear is needed from them in that moment and be in service to something bigger. I think that's what I'm really grateful, having spent, you know, the first 5 years of my career in theatre mostly, is that you do have to learn how to be in service to the bigger thing.
100%.
I think with screen, there is definitely the potential to be that, but just because of the nature of how a shoot is structured and the fact that you can be more isolationist if you so choose, it's sometimes more difficult to kind of zoom out and have that bigger picture, a bit like you were speaking about before, right? In terms of understanding, when you zoom out and look at human trends, we're actually generally doing that. It's about being able to do that within each project and have that team spirit and have that generosity. You know, the best actors and the best creatives are really generous people because they're giving a lot of themselves in terms of their vulnerability, but they're doing that knowing that they also have to catch someone else's. You know, we have to work together in this moment. We're both like taking a punt at what this scene means. So let's do that and try and like help each other find our way through it. It's like trying to walk through a dark room together, but you know you're both moving towards the light and you find it eventually. But if one of you goes, I can see the light, see you later, and you run off, well, it's only one of you that's going to make it there, and your scene partner's left in the dust, still scrambling around. That's not fun for anyone, you know. So whatever can facilitate that, I think, is the best thing, because then the two of you walk out into the light at the end of it, and that's where your audience is. That's where the people that you're trying to reach and connect with are, and they want to see both of you come out. They don't want to just see one person shine and be like, oh, what happened to matey in the back, you know?
I was going to ask something along the lines of like, do you approach theatre from different from what you might film, or do you approach an independent film in a different way from what you might approach a big Marvel movie? But I think you've answered it beautifully already. What you've said is to me sounds a lot like, whatever you're doing, give to the piece. You're all working on something bigger than you. And although you're paid to speak, you've got to learn to listen first before you can get there in as good a way as what you want.
Absolutely. And you have to listen to so many things. You have to listen to your director. You have to listen to the actor that you're working with.
Yeah.
If this is acting, right, that we're talking about. If you're a writer, you have to listen to your notes and listen to your actors as well, because they bring your script to life, right? And they will illuminate things that you didn't realize were there, or things that maybe need to change or need to be, dialed up or dialed down. Listen to the crew when they're telling you to stand on your mark, because the focus puller is trying to get you in focus. And if we're going to have to go take after take, and you decide you just want to do it over here or over there, we're going to have to cut and go again. That eats into the time. So I think the fundamental thing to understand about all these different mediums, or even if it's within the same medium, all of these different projects that you're working on, is there might be different things required of you that are related to the logistics of the medium or the logistics of the project. You're working on the Olivier stage at the National, and there's a drum revolve in the middle. That's different to working in a black box theatre. What's required of you to reach the people at the back of that amphitheatre side space versus what's required of you in a small room, maybe not necessarily the same in terms of technique, but fundamentally the core of what you're doing is the same, I believe.
Yeah.
Right. And that's because also for me, I don't know, I sort of imagine it like this little kind of ball of creativity inside me. And it's like all of my creative exploits come from that same thing. And they're all interconnected, whether it's acting, whether it's music, whether it's writing, whether it's...
You're not like a cow with 4 creative stomachs. You don't have like an acting creativity
an acting box,
and a writing one.
No. They all interweave and interlink, right? There's a common thread between them all. And so that will always be there, no matter what I'm doing, whatever craft or whatever medium that I'm working in. But I just have to understand the specifics of my environment, right? It's almost like survival skills, really. Like what's in the room, what's here, who's here, what's with me, what's required of me. Great, I'm going to get on and do it. And then I've still got my toolkit. I've still got the things that I know. I know how to project in a theatre to reach the back seat. And I know that there's things about that might be a little bit unnatural, but that's part of the craft, right? And it's your job to understand how to get the craft into your muscle memory. So you practice, you go and study if you can. It's hard to study at the moment. It's hard. It's expensive. The arts has taken an absolute battering. And it's difficult to find the kinds of programs that I think I had access to when I was coming up. But there's other people that you can get together with, you can collaborate with. You can make there's films shot on iPhones these days. You can do stuff. Do you know what I mean? You have to be enterprising. That hasn't changed. I think it's become more important to be if you want to get a leg in. A leg in, a foot in, a step up, a leg up, get some kind of limb inside.
Pick a limb.
Pick a limb and get it in. Hey. But beyond that, I think that is something that you need to keep doing anyway. I did I did a short cinematography course, an online one recently, and it was wonderful.
Right.
And I had no idea what I was doing. I've got this Fujifilm camera. I don't know how to use it. Right. I don't know,
Ask
Jensen.
Jack
I
and
don't know.
Sam
Yeah,
after.
I don't know how to use it. I can't take
I'll
pictures
teach
like
you.
you guys. But every week he was like, just take some photos. There would be an assignment.
Yeah.
And then I made this little 2-minute short at the end of it, and it was weird. It was weird. It was I'd just seen Space Odyssey in 4K.
Oh mate, I
at
bet
cinema.
that was a
So
weird
yeah.
short, man.
So my short was giving lo-fi, the lowest of the fi Kubrick. But he said professional DOPs, they take pictures every day. They just take pictures of stuff. They'll take pictures on their phone. They'll go out with their cameras and they just take pictures. They're just constantly taking snapshots of the world. And that's how they practice, and that's how they keep their craft up, and you've got to try and find your own version of that. What's your thing that you just do all the time? Even if it's people watching. I love people watching. I do less of it now because I don't sit on the tube in the way that I used to. But whatever it is that keeps you going, you write a poem a day, and it doesn't have to be super romanticized. Because I think also in this day and age, we've got a lot of pressure on ourselves around how to do things in the right way. And I think there's a lot online that is teaching us that we have to be up at 3 a.m. every morning, and we have to have done bang, 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 bang.
You got to wake up
even...
before you went to sleep.
All of that.
Wahlberg it.
It's long. It's long. It doesn't have to be that. If that works for you, it's great. It doesn't have to be that. But it can be really small, simple rituals or things that just keep you connected with the idea of expressing yourself and challenging yourself through that expression and how you approach that expression. Those things are important to try and keep up, and then just try and find people, man.
Yeah.
And you've got to, and I'm not saying it's elbows out, because I hate all that. I don't like elbows-ness.
I don't think it does anyone any
It's not
favours,
necessary,
really.
and it's not really, I don't think it's needed. I know a lot of people think it is, but I don't think it's needed. But there is something about having some grit and having some tenacity and some determination and some curiosity more than anything. Curiosity and excitement. And I don't even want to use the word hunger, because I think that can lead to the elbows thing.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's that. I think it's more like a kind of slightly wide-eyed greenness about yourself that you have to keep on continually refreshing. And it gets harder as you go along in your career, because you start to, you can very easily get jaded or start to think you know it all, and then hubris starts to set in, and then before you know it, you find yourself in a very different place. So you have to keep on reinvigorating that kind of curious inner child.
You said something really beautiful there about the best people you've worked with are the most giving.
Mm-hmm.
So looking at your incredible career so far, you've worked with some of the all-time greats like Viola, Barry Jenkins. Are those some of the people that spring to mind when you say the words, the best people I've worked with are the most giving?
Absolutely. Do you know what? I actually feel really, really fortunate. I've worked with some heavyweights, man. But even the people who aren't necessarily big name Academy Award winners, when I worked on the show Girl from the North Country, that was one of the most incredible ensembles. People who didn't have a named character online, but the generosity that you see in them, all of us are working it out together. Yeah. Working with Kieran Hines and Shirley Henderson, they're two of the most generous actors I've ever met, in that they're giving it their all. Yeah. And, Kieran's always like, is that all right? What'd you think? And then, Conor McPherson, who was the writer-director, he's generous as well, because he was just giving over his script, and you'd ask him a question and he'd be like, I don't know. And then he'd sort of float off down the corridor and you're like, oh, well, thanks. But actually what you realize is he's giving you a gift, because he's saying, I don't know, show me something and then we'll figure it out. And there's humility in that, But it is also wonderful when you experience it from a Viola Davis or a Barry Jenkins or a Halle Berry, 3 Academy Award winners who are turning up to work in exactly the same way as you and going, I don't know, let's figure it out. Yeah. That's just the best thing to hear from a fellow actor or director or writer, particularly somebody who, when you're sort of earlier in your career and you haven't won an Academy Award, you're like, oh my God, I'm here on Barry Jenkins' set, or I'm here sharing a scene with Viola Davis, or, I'm here getting direction from Halle Berry, who's also now going to step into the scene and act opposite me. But they, then you have first of all, the three of them are really funny. So you have a laugh with them, which is also great, and great. We've all humanized everything.
Yeah.
Let's now move on. And then it's back to basics, it's back to that, like I was saying, that thread that carries through everything. And yes, the logistics are different and the specifics of what you were doing for that project are different, but it's fundamentally the same thing.
We're coming to the end of our podcast today. Sheila, mate, honestly, thank you so much for being here.
It's all right.
Thank
you to these books.
I could talk to you for days. These strategically placed books.
Yeah. These paid actor books.
Final question to wrap up, if that's all right.
Sure.
Well, one double-sided question, because we talked a lot about both acting and writing. So if you could write a piece for any actor, alive or dead, and then the same if you could act for any director, past or present,
okay,
who would they be? So you're acting for a director, past or present, and then you're writing for an actor, past or present. Who do you choose?
All right. I'm usually terrible at these kind of things, but seeing as I've already mentioned them, if I could act for any director, it's Kubrick.
Oh,
because
mate, yeah.
I just
You'd
love
be doing
to
a
understand.
million takes.
Yeah, which I hate.
Yeah.
but like just to understand, I don't know. I just like seeing us. I'd seen it before, but seeing it in 4K at the cinema recently, it really exploded my mind.
That film is something else.
Yeah,
and
then you understand when it was shot and how it was shot and the kind of visionariness about what he managed to achieve, more broadly as well across all of his work. And I feel like that is what I would love to understand. You get these people over the course of however long who kind of dedicate their lives to a particular craft.
Yeah.
They almost like become that craft,
Yeah.
and they're also pioneers. And I think we sort of take it for granted because there are so many things now that feel Kubrick-esque.
Yeah.
That we sort of forget that, like, where a lot of that, the seed of where a lot of that came from. And to be working with that person at the time when that thing was like truly groundbreaking and fresh and like no one had really seen anything like that before. And then to see it afterwards, because I know there are a lot of actors who don't enjoy watching their own stuff. I enjoy watching the things that I'm in, not because I enjoy like looking at myself, but because once I've shot something, I've already given it away in my mind. So I'm like, it's whatever now. It's in the can. The editors and whoever do what they want to do with it. I genuinely want to see the whole thing. So when I watched Underground Railroad, which I did with Barry Jenkins, TV show, I wanted to watch the show.
Yeah.
And I am a huge fan of the show, right? And was just happy to be a part of it and proud to be in it. I think it's beautiful and extraordinary. But it's like, I don't know, I'd love to be able to sit outside of a Kubrick thing and watch myself in it and be like, this is how it came together, how extraordinary. So that's that person.
Now you got your writer's hat on.
Right for.
Who, past or present, would you just love more than anyone else to see speaking your words?
Do you know what? I would love to write something for Shirley Henderson, who I've worked with. Just because watching her interpret the character of Elizabeth in Girl from the North Country was one of the most extraordinary things for me that I had experienced in my career. Watching this woman transform, watching her process and what she got off the page from that character and what she kind of turned that character into was truly inspirational. Like I'd still call her mum. I haven't texted her in ages actually. I should text her. But like, hey mum, I was just talking about you earlier. But I think I'd like to write something for her or someone like her. Somebody who can just like, they read what you've got and they go, okay, I'm really going to take it upon myself as an actor to like squeeze the juice out of this. Again, not in an indulgent way, but in just like what's coming up for me? They don't phone it in. I'd love to write something for any actor who is never phoning it in, and she never phoned it in. And it's, as a performance, it was so incredibly beautiful and tender and muscular and energetic. And I was like, I don't know how you're not knackered every single night, because I was knackered just watching her.
Yeah.
Right? So I think it would be her. I'm sure there's others that I can like think of, but
Nah, I think that's perfect.
yeah, it'd be her.
Sheila Atim, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening. We really appreciate it. You don't have to, but if you fancied it, give us a follow. Lots of love, and we'll see you on the next one.
That was it, baby. That was it. Get loaded.